everybody, but this is the website that I created, and it has all kinds of free resources, tenant handbooks, owner manuals, checklists, all kinds of resources related to property management. You do have to register for the site, but then it's free access 24/7, 365 for as long as I have the website. All free resources for you. I will show you some of those resources during the class. I'll point those out to you, okay? Now before I review this, I'm going to start off with a kind of a day in the life of a property manager. This is really a nothing burger event. This is just sort of what we do. But I will tell you that it, for this tenant, stood out. So this is about a year and a half ago, maybe going on 2 years ago, I had a tenant getting ready to move in. And as I always do, I went and checked the property one more time. And I happened to notice two things. In about the 3 weeks since I had been there, some weeds had grown up in the front yard. Of course, there's an HOA. We want to get that taken care of. And then when I walked by and opened the refrigerator filter light had gone red. Had not been like that the last time I went and checked the property. So I did two things. I got on Amazon. I ordered, actually it had a 3-pack of filters, which meant the tenant wasn't going to need to worry about replacing the filter probably for the rest of the tenancy. I had it shipped overnight to the property. It was on the front door when the tenant moved in. And then I scheduled the landscapers to just do a real quick. Obviously, the tenant's not responsible for those weeds that grew before they moved into the property. Not a big deal. That's just kind of what we do. I show you this review only because this was the result of something that's kind of what my job is. This is from Holly. And by the way, I'm going to use Holly later because another event came up. It's not always 5 stars, even though you have 5-star ratings from tenants. Hi, Paul. I'm still packing my things. I want to take a moment to put my feet up and tell you how much your professionalism and care has meant to me during this past week. I so appreciate you having the fridge filter in your yard ready for me. You have no idea how much this meant in a simple and significant way. I don't bring that up because that's common practice when I get reviews for tenants. Trust me, my 1-star reviews on my websites, those are my tenants that weren't happy. So this is a very uncommon event. But it's those little things that we do day in and day out that make the difference. That tenant has since renewed. In a very competitive rental market where we have the number of applicants are way, way down, we want to keep our tenants happy. As a result, that landlord doesn't have to worry about the fact that their property is going to be vacant. We got the lease renewed for them. Happy tenant, happy landlord, happy property manager, because I'm collecting management fees as well. So with that in mind, what we're going to be covering are some common pain points that tenants have with property managers. This is where I think you can probably answer some of these questions without even being a property manager, right? Number 2, we're going to figure out what the duty of property managers is to all parties, in this case, our customer, the tenant. We're going to talk about best practices when it comes to lease terms and the charges that we are charging, especially in light of AB 121, which we're going to go over. Number 4, we're going to talk about how we can better communicate with the tenants. I'm going to throw a softball at you right now. One of the most common pain points, lack of communication, right? Then we're going to talk about best practices for maintenance responses. We'll go over health, safety, and welfare issues, and that's related to SB 383, or 283, excuse me. And then we're going to talk about avoiding fair housing discrimination, and then finally, the move out. The move out is the one where tenants are the least happy. And so what are some best practices for that? So to kind of get the ball rolling, let's have a quick discussion. I'm going to have you turn to your neighbor, and I want you to try to figure this out. What are the common tenant complaints that they have about property managers? I want you to talk to each other, come up with 2 or 3, and then we'll go around the room and share with each other. Okay? Ready, set, go.
Are you ready? So So what were some of the
Oh, I don't know. It's hard because that. So
We'll go about 30 more seconds, and I'll ask for a few to respond. All right. I imagine it didn't take much to figure out a few of these, right? Even if you don't do property management, you can probably figure this out. Do I have a few volunteers that can share their responses? Okay, we've got Yvette. Go ahead, Yvette.
We just think, like, property manager not responding with a sense of urgency.
Okay, lack of urgency or lack of response, period. That was Yvette's response. Thank you very much. We got another one back here. That's Jonas. Is it Jonas? Jonas, sorry. Harold. There you go. So Jonas has a personal experience. I didn't hear the very first part. I heard about the move out. What was the other thing that you mentioned?
well, like when things happen, they don't fix it on time.
Got it. So Jonas had a couple of great points. He talked about when things happen, they don't communicate, they don't fix things, and then he had an issue with the move out where he felt that the charges were excessive. They didn't respond to him. He kind of gave up after about 3 months. Anything else that you can think of that might be a pain point? Got another one over here. Angela, go ahead.
We talked about that, the tenants complaining about cleanliness when they moved in, colors of the property.
Thank you. Angela pointed out the condition of the property when they moved in, how clean it was, right? Let's look at a couple of the ones that are very common. Poor communication, number one, almost always. Number two is maintenance, lack of response on maintenance. The third highest complaint, and this is where AB 121 comes in, lack of transparency on the charges. We're going to talk about AB 121 specifically and how that affects that. And then there's also, of course, discrimination complaints, issues with privacy. So we'll cover that as well. Safety comes up quite often. And then the last one, speaking of not being transparent on charges, not only when you move in and all of a sudden there's all these extra fees, overcharging at the move out. So in light of all those things, we're going to cover our duties owed to all parties, which would be the customer in the transaction. And this is just a quick review, of course, because we already know that. However, before we do that, let's talk about why this matters for the landlord. Because again, as a property manager, my job is to provide client service to my landlord, customer service to my tenant. Why do I want to improve my customer service to the tenant? Is because if they're not happy tenants, they move out. Then you have higher turnover. We have approximately 4 months of inventory for the rental market right now. That means the landlord's going to lose a lot of money because there's going to be higher vacancies and it's going to take longer to rent it out. Just like the sales market a few years back, rentals were going gangbusters. I would get 15 or 20 people applying. That's come and gone. The rent market is flat, days on market are way up, it's taking longer to re-rent. So we want to improve our customer service regardless of the market condition, okay? So with that in mind, let's talk about our duties owed to all parties and how this relates to customer service. Of course, the first one being honesty. We have to be super transparent and honest with them. Second one is that reasonable skill and care. And so we're going to cover some of the best practices that can help with reasonable skill and care in the transaction. And then disclosure. And just like every other industry, when legislators feel like consumers are not being protected with enough disclosure, they're going to start legislating some of that disclosure. And that's exactly what happened in the 2025 Nevada legislative session. There was an issue with, in their opinion, backed by fact, there was an issue with the fact that many landlords, property management, especially institutional investor type landlords, were not being transparent on the fees, for example. And then, of course, other duties, responsibilities. So we have to abide by regulations and statutes and do the best we can to service those tenants. With that framework, let's cover on the disclosure side this new law. If you're not aware of AB 121, this took effect on October 1st. That's why I've inserted it into the class, because it's a supplement to what we are now covering in terms of disclosure for tenants. Under AB 121, number one, a tenant can ask for a copy of the lease at any time. Anytime they would like a copy of the lease, they can request it, and the property manager has to provide it. Before they've viewed the property, before they have applied for the property, before they're approved for the property, at any time during that transaction, they can ask for a copy of the lease. Now, that's a little difficult because everybody moves in a different day and things like that. It can't just be a blank lease, by the way. So for many of us, we're actually creating a generic lease with a move-in date on the 1st and saying this is subject to the exact move-in date. The charges are subject to change. Okay. If they apply for a rental property, they are not approved, and the landlord or the property manager didn't actually run their credit, do all the background checks, all of that, they can get a refund, or they must get a refund. Now, the news has reported what? Guess what, tenants? If you apply for a rental property and you're not approved, you get your money back. It's not actually what the law says. It's that third part that matters. The property manager actually has to do something with their application and run their credit, etc. I imagine if it ever went to court, they would have to show this is when I pulled the credit, etc. Yeah, that's the key, is how do you know? And it would be on the property manager or the landlord to show proof that they actually did that. So there were some bad actors in our industry. It's always a few bad apples that, right, ruin it for everybody. They were just collecting applications and keeping the money regardless of whether they actually did the credit run or anything. So that was the way for them to eliminate that.
They cannot provide, when they ask for a copy of the lease, they cannot provide a blank one?
So Elvira asked a great question. She said, if you get a request from a tenant to get a copy of the lease, it can't be a blank one. So this is untested. Best practice would be, because it's all about disclosure, you want to have it actually filled out so that they can see what all the charges are. It's very transparent. Say that again, Elvira. Thank you. Elvira asked, what about their name? So again, that part can be to be determined, right? But the rest of it, it can't just be watermark draft, here's a blank lease. They want to see what are the charges and the breakdown of the charges and all of that. And you have to be able to provide that to them. Now, the next change, and the reason this also matters, oh, got another question here, and that was, sorry, I can't see your name tag.
If you're not pre-qualified tenant, they are not, their credit score could be very low, and you have to provide them, or you have to pre-qualify them.
Rich asked, do you have to pre-qualify them? Then the law does not say that they must be pre-qualified. Anybody that is a prospective tenant can ask for a copy of the lease at any time. The law does not say if they're pre-qualified. It just says period. They want a copy of the lease to look over, they get to look at it. And here's why that's also important, just so you know. I actually was on the Nevada Realtors legislative management team. We actually looked at every bill that was going through the session. We helped write amendments to it and things like that. We also saw what the legislators were seeing. There were some institutional investors that would have 80, 90, 100 plus page leases. And what they would do is they would have a cover sheet that said, here's all the potential charges. To their credit, that's a good thing. I think you should have that. We did that before the law changed. But then if you saw a charge for $300, when you go to page 75 of the lease, it was actually $800. It was bait and switch. They were just doing generic numbers on this page, but the actual lease contents. So if a tenant was looking at those numbers thinking they were going to pay whatever for that particular service, they assumed it was $300 because that's what the cover sheet said. So it was bait and switch. Just like, I call it Ticketmaster. Have any of you ever shopped at Ticketmaster for tickets? Okay. My daughter, my youngest daughter, I have 4 daughters, by the way. Prayers would be appreciated. I have 4 daughters. My youngest one thinks that I'm going to take her to Taylor Swift. She's out of her mind. If I were to go on Taylor Swift and find the cheapest $1,500 a piece tickets, and when I go to check out, it wouldn't be $3,000 plus tax, would it? It's $3,000 plus the service fee, plus you breathed oxygen today. There's a fee for that. It reminds me of when I got a master's degree in Indiana, and they literally had, I'm not kidding you, a sidewalk fee. So as a graduate assistant, they paid for my tuition and they paid me a stipend. But then by the time I had my sidewalk fee, my technology use fee, my blah, 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 blah fee, I still was paying a couple of $1,000s a semester to go to graduate school. Same thing. So the whole idea of this provide the least rich ahead of time is because they want it to be very consistent that when they move in, it's going to be the same. Just like buyers, when they're getting a loan, you know how the loan estimate has to match the final that they get, the beginning and the end have to match? Same kind of concept. Rich, you had your hand up again.
The tenant contact with all this information, this must be somewhere in the advertising, or somewhere. In that area, you don't have all the charges right there.
So Rich had.
Everything's all in detail. So are you still in the same business?
So Rich said, well, if you're advertising it, do you still need it? The answer is yes. The law says yes. And this is actually the segue into this next part. When it comes to these charges and disclosure, you are required to show the rent as a total fixed amount. What we used to do is, they're now calling this base rent. We would advertise the base rent. Let's say for round numbers, it was $2,000 a month. And then we're making the tenant reimbursed for trash and sewer. That's another, let's say, $48. Then there might be a residence benefits package, et cetera, another $40. So when they go to move in, the actual charges are higher than $2,000. Now you have to advertise that as a single amount. It's even more restricted than that. If the tenant can put utilities in their name, they must. That includes mid and short-term rental properties that are like 30 days to 6 months. Yes, it's inconvenient for the landlord, because what does the landlord have to do? Turn around multiple times a year on these midterm rentals and put it back in their name and pay a connection fee each time. But the law is very clear. They must allow the tenant to put it in their name. If the tenant cannot put it in their name, you actually have to provide the contact information of the utility company. The tenant can then call to verify that in fact they can't put it in their name. And by the way, and then I see a hand up here, and by the way, the fact that there was late utilities and there's an outstanding charge does not mean the tenant cannot put it in their name. According to the legislature, the landlord has to pay that outstanding balance so the tenant can put it in their name. So Miguel asked, doesn't it go with the tenant? That is correct. However, they ultimately are making the landlord responsible for it. The landlord can then go after the tenant. Absolutely, according to this law. Let me get Yvette's question and then Mark. Go ahead, Yvette.
Going back to the sewer and trash charge, you see that a lot. Like I don't do any property management, but I have done a couple rentals, so you see that a lot. Like in the additional terms, it'll say tenant needs to pay an additional $45, right? Trash sewer, and then maybe there's like a landscaping fee or something like that. So now you're saying the total amount of the rent that they're showing should have that included?
Yes, Yvette was saying you see these extra charges a lot, but then now it has to be included. Yes, it has to be advertised as that amount, whatever the total is for all those charges. If you have optional pet rent, not every tenant's going to pay that. You can just say there's an optional pet fee if you have a pet. And then we have Mark, and I think I saw another hand. Go ahead, Mark.
So you touched on something that really upsets me.
Let me get the mic. Oh, I stuck it. I'm really bad about technology. I throw it in my pocket. Here we go, Mark.
So here's what upsets me. The water district extends credit to somebody. They don't collect the money. The tenant moves out. There's late fees. There's all kinds of overuse charges. And then they say, but the landlord has to pay that. How can that be legal that the water district or the power company or the gas company can extend somebody credit, not tell the landlord that the guy is past due, and then when you move out, the landlord's not to pay that?
Mark had an excellent question, did he not? The reality is this. That's what the law that was passed says.
What law?
AB 121.
That the landlord has to pay the past due?
If the landlord can have it to where the tenant can put it in their name, they must. It is not optional. They shall.
But that's not the, well, I'm okay.
Can
so
that be
this is
negotiated
not
between
part
the
of it.
landlord and the tenant?
Sorry, Elvira said what?
Can that be negotiated by the tenant and the landlord?
Elvira asked, can that be negotiated between the tenant and the landlord? Not according to AB 121. Not according to AB 121. Got another question? Oh, I'm sorry. Elvira said, can whether or not the landlord keeps it in their name or not be negotiated between the landlord and tenant. AB 121 is clear that cannot happen. If it's possible for the tenant to put it in their name, the landlord shall have the utilities put in the tenant's name. The word shall in the law is very clear. Let me get Ken's, and then we got two more.
Does this include trash?
So Ken asked, does this include trash? The two carve-outs in the law were trash and sewer. Nothing else. If there's master metered water, that can also be master metered water. There are a few, for example, mid-rise and high-rises that have master metered electric. That's not addressed in the law. But trash and sewer can be carved out. We got a question over here or a comment from Perry Lynn.
Okay, so first of all, I feel like that's a risk that you assume by renting out your property, that you know who your tenant is or whatever, as far as having to pay that balance. But also, you just answered the question that I had, was if it was more than the trash and the sewer.
So Perry Lynn made two comments. She said, that's kind of the risk you take as a landlord renting your property. That's kind of what the legislature's opinion is. And then, yes, is it more than trash and sewer? So trash and sewer can be carved out and absolutely can remain in the tenant's name or the landlord's name. But the other utilities, if it can be put in the tenant name, it must be.
Repeat that. So that means the trash and the sewer can still be under the landlord?
The trash and the sewer can be, yes, so it says here, water, gas, electric may be broken out separately if it applies. If it cannot be put in the tenant's name, you can break that out. But here's how specific it got, and then we have Rich over here with a question. Here's how specific it got. It literally says there must be an asterisk. You must name in an other charge. You must put an asterisk there, and then you must write an addendum to the lease. This is how in the weeds this law got. An addendum to the lease that says other charge number 1 means this. And you have to actually spell out exactly what it means. Other charge number 2 means this. So it's very, very specific. I will also tell you that this is a transparency law. It's all about being super transparent. And then the problem is we're waiting until some attorneys and judges get involved to be able to interpret some of what the law says. Go ahead, Rich.
I have a company, water company, many times on this. I said, when you don't get a suitability, that terminates right away. How come you didn't do it? They say, well, the company policy. We challenge you many times. Well, if the tenant applies for the water services under their name, it's not under the owner's name. Besides, the water company will not send any bill to the owner until the number is more than $500, sometimes it's even more than that. How come they cannot just send the service, the bill to the owner, if the tenant, late for their payment? So what I did for my client, I asked the owner every 3 months you contact the water company and to get the update for the water bill. So if the tenant fails to pay, then we'll go after them. That's what we.
Thank you, Rich. Did everybody hear what Rich was saying?
Can I add to that?
Yes, let me finish up with Rich here.
It's the same question, but you didn't answer to the question of the hearing. Because the question was, the gentleman up front was asking, the utility companies are checking the applicant's background, and then they're issuing them unsecured credit for their water, power, gas. And then the customer will end up not paying. So the credit card company, not a credit, utility company did their background check. If deposit was required, they asked for deposit. If they didn't ask for the deposit, that means they didn't do their background check properly. So why the landlord? How legal it is to charge the landlord for that? Was that what you're asking?
Yes. So, and I'm sorry. Tell me your name, sir.
Armin.
Okay. What was it, Armin?
Armin.
Armin. Thank you. So keep in mind, the public utilities companies have their procedure. The state legislature made a law to supersede that. It's a change in the law. Now, I will tell you, just as Rich was saying, one of the things that we are reaching out to some of the utility companies about is it possible to have in the lease that the tenant must authorize for the landlord to have access to their account? And some utility companies are saying yes, they will honor that, and if the landlord calls to get a status update, they will do it. Some are not. We're all navigating this new process because even the public utilities, they were not subject to this before the law went into effect on October 1st. So I understand what the policies of the public utilities were in the past. As of October 1st, the state legislature overrides their company policy.
So doesn't security deposit cover all that? No. Security deposit?
Miguel asked, is the security deposit going to cover it? Possibly, depends. So depending on the utility company, for example, Las Vegas Valley Water District may allow the utility bill just to keep running up and up and up. They'll never turn the water off. They'll never notify the landlord. And then there's a $1,500 charge that the landlord must now pay. So keep in mind, every time there's a new law, we have to make adjustments. And so what Rich had recommended and talked about is what a lot of landlords and property managers are now doing. Have it actually written into the lease that the landlord must be an authorized party on that account. You can then send a copy of that lease to the utility company that will honor that, and then you can get updates on the status of their utilities to overcome. Got one more question.
Last comment. I was gonna say, hitting on what he said, don't you think that's kind of crazy because that's gonna affect tenants to be able to rent because they're not gonna be able to, if they start upping the security deposit, they might be like, I can't afford that type of security deposit, number one. And number two, I feel like eventually, let's just be honest, tenants really don't care about your own property, so eventually tenants might take advantage of that, like once they start learning that or whatever, and landlords are gonna stop being able to rent because eventually those people, you know what I mean? Like it's just gonna be kind of.
So Yvette talked about a lot that I won't totally unpack, but will it maybe substantially increase the security? It could. By law, you can only charge 3 months worth of deposits, including the last month's rent. So it's not possible for them to collect 5 months and mandate that. Okay, that's number one. Number two, I will end with what I began with. When there's a few bad actors, legislators step in. There's unintended consequences to every new law that's passed. And you can see that there are some unintended consequences that were not addressed in this law. I mentioned, for example, master metered electric, not addressed in this law. Essentially right now, a landlord that has master metered electric is going to have to just guess. I think it's going to be another $200 for electric, so I'm just going to make that part of the rent and I won't bill the tenant. That's the only thing they can do now according to law. And here's why this also matters. In addition to a $250 fine, they can go after landlords for actual damage and punitive damage. Failure to abide by this new law being less than transparent, doing deceptive practices when it comes to advertising, can result in actual punitive damages and $250 in fines on top of that. So of course, it's super important that landlords are aware of this. Even if you're not a property manager, if you are working with investors, make sure they understand this law. There's lots of new laws that pass related to landlord-tenant, but that's the one that we're going to cover for today.
Can you please clarify? I'm a little bit confused. One is, okay, can you clarify the total figure? What does that include? Does that include, I heard you saying that yes, a trust and sewer can be under that landlord's name. However, it has to be disclosed as owner and then name them, or is that part of the total figure?
So Elvira asked, what is that total figure that has to be advertised include? It must include any recurring charge that the tenant is mandated to pay. It does not have to include if the utility does not have to stay in the landlord's name, doesn't have to include any of those charges. But if you're going to leave trash and sewer in the landlord's name, that's part of that total figure. That's part of that total figure. Okay? Now, in addition to that, we want to navigate how we can get the information out. Somebody had brought up, well, shouldn't they be able to go online and see this? Well, we have to make sure it's there to begin with. One of the ones is called an MLS tenant application summary page. I'm going to show you what that looks like. You want to have that on your website. You want to have that on your rental application, and you can use what's known as a conditional approval form. So let me show you each one of those. When it comes to the MLS tenant application summary, if you go to look at a rental listing in the MLS, you can do a printout called Tenant Application Summary. Now here's the caveat. What does it say on every MLS listing? Deemed reliable but not guaranteed. If the property manager doesn't put this information, it's not going to be there. But here's what it looks like. When you go to look up a rental listing, here's one of mine. Click on Print. Go down to Tenant Application Summary. And then you get a printout that looks like this. Very similar to the client detail sheet at the top. Notice it's got all the generic stats, beds, baths, square footage, et cetera, et cetera. Look at the bottom. If the property manager is putting it in, it has all of the fees. It has the application requirements. It has the application website. It has the contact information for the property management company. Because if a showing agent is a referring agent and simply showing the property and then referring it to the property manager, their actual job after that is say, oh, you would like to apply? Here's all the information you're going to need to know about applying. Here's the name of the property manager. Then they contact the property manager. Hey, I just showed this property. I believe this renter is going to apply. Okay? So that's why we have this tenant application summary. It's a synopsis. Now I get lazy. You notice the very last sentence under the application requirements and instructions, see website for more information. Because we have it on our website too.
What happened with the co-op?
So Elvira asked, what about the co-op? So as of November 2022, no cooperative compensation can be listed in the MLS, including rental referrals. Renters were not part of the Sitzer-Burnett trial and the settlement. However, NAR has decided that any offer of compensation of any kind cannot be on the MLS, including rental referral fees. So a showing agent that has a prospective tenant would have to contact the property manager and say, hey, are you offering any sort of compensation as a referral fee? And then find out. So Elvira asked, say that again?
Let's just say I called you and then there's no referral. So then it means that I will have to charge it to the tenant. So
Elvira said, if I call you and there's no referral fee, I would have to charge it to the tenant. The answer is, and get ready for this, I'm going to prep you with the two best answers for any CE class you ever attend. Number one, it depends. And number two, ask your broker. Here's why it depends. Do you have any kind of a compensation agreement already spelled out with that prospective tenant? And then number two, what did your broker say? This is the type of agreement we're going to go into. This is a broker decision. I will let you know that compensation does not equal representation. What do I mean by that? Your broker could come up with a compensation agreement for a prospective tenant. That doesn't mean you then represent that prospective tenant. But they could ask for some sort of a representation agreement. So it depends on what your brokered policy is on that. In addition to having it out on the MLS and having much more information on the MLS than we typically have done in the past, and again, the caveat to this is it depends on if the property manager is actually using this information and inputting the data into the MLS. It won't be there if the manager didn't do it. You also want to check on the website for your rental application. And so what we do on our rental application is before they click and move ahead in the application, they have to acknowledge all of our criteria and our costs. So you see that little you have to slide and slide and slide and read all of the criteria, click on acknowledge, and then it'll allow you to start the process. Does that mean that they read it? I mean, let's be honest. How many of you are guilty? I'm going to raise my hand. How many of you are guilty of you have to download an app, and in order to do it, you have to read all this stuff?
And then you say agree.
And you just scroll to the end, and you click, and you're like, I just want to download the app, right? You didn't realize that they're going to have you donate your kidney, right? Your firstborn, right? So it's the same thing. I can't guarantee they're going to read it, but I disclose it on the application before they even apply. In addition to that, we have it on our website. So for every single property, when they go to look at it, they can check all of the details, all of the fine print ahead of time. Disclose, disclose, disclose. When in doubt, disclose. Then, if we have a tenant get approved, if they have not already asked for a copy of the lease, which my experience, Mark, I know is the property manager as well, my experience is I don't have very many tenants asking for a copy of the lease yet. That's not what's been put on the news. So far, what's been put on the news is what? If you don't get approved for a property, you get your money back. They don't tell you the conditions about that. They just say you get your money back. So tenants really think that's true, but they don't know anything else about this new law. That being said, even before this new law passed, we had what we call a conditional approval form. That's that QR code. Again, if you want it, I have a copy of that you can use. And what we do is we give them a total breakdown before we ever get to the lease part so they can see exactly what they're doing. So we put their names down, the property address, their move-in dates, all of the charges. If we charge additional security, the reason why. Okay. And then the total move-in and a breakdown of how they pay those charges. And then we have all kinds of other policies that we go through and review with them. I think my clicker's dying. In terms of our policies and procedures.
2 cashier's checks?
2 cashier's checks. Yeah, certified funds. That was Miguel that said that. So all kinds of information. What did I put up on the screen before? Disclose, disclose, disclose. Right? Did we get to the lease signing yet? Nope. Haven't gotten there yet. Then we go through and we talk about our procedures for any kind of animal or pet. Speak now or forever hold your peace, etc. In addition to that, we need to disclose material facts. This is where a prospective tenant may ask for these material facts, but certainly once we are converting them to a tenant, we have the statutory obligation or the duty owed to disclose those material facts to all parties. So the question becomes, what is a material fact? A defect on the property would be a material fact. Would you agree? Yes? How many of you think if somebody decided that their air conditioner was getting old, it's time to replace it, it was working. 2 years ago, they replaced the air conditioner. Are they required to disclose that as a defect on the property? What do you think?
Nope.
Jonas says yes. Miguel?
I'm saying it'd be good to let them know.
Miguel says, it'd be good to let them. I agree. Is that a material fact and a defect on the property? It is not. It is not. Is it something I'm going to market? You better believe it. What are the 2 biggest issues we have in Nevada when it comes to maintenance issues? HVAC and plumbing. So if they know when they move in that they're not going to have to worry about the HVAC because it's pretty much a brand new unit, that's a positive thing. That doesn't mean it's a mandatory disclosure necessarily, So yes, we have disclosure that's required, but it's not crystal clear what that is. There's only one item that is. The Nevada Supreme Court ruled in 2007 that water damage never expires. Meaning, I had a flood, I had to get a restoration company out, we redid the entire bathroom and one of the bedrooms because it was water damage. It doesn't matter how long ago that was, it must be disclosed. The other ones, it depends. So, not Yvette, I'm sorry, Carolyn has a question.
So if they don't, then what happens?
Carolyn says, if they don't, then what happens? Then they could, depending on what they're doing at that time, let's say there was an issue that came up with a repair and it was discovered there was the dreaded M word in the property. And that M word has been around for a while because there was previous water damage. They could sue the landlord in court and get damages. Now, what about the items that could stigmatize a property? We have statutes that address that. And so we have a statutory obligation not to disclose certain conditions unless our client gives us permission. Okay? And I say, get it in writing. So here are the conditions. There was a homicide or a suicide. Somebody with HIV or AIDS. Any death in the property except when the death was caused by the property itself. So if it's natural causes, there's no obligation to disclose that death. But let's say the staircase was faulty. Somebody fell to their death. They then fixed the staircase. Even though they fixed the staircase, they still have to disclose that death. If the property was used as a meth lab, and then a certified entity goes in and certifies that there's no more chemicals in the property, you cannot disclose that that was a former meth lab. You cannot. Unless the landlord says, I went down to the corner of Home Depot, I hired a bunch of guys, we went inside, we got some Kills paint. I'm telling you, we killed all those chemicals with that Kills paint. It's perfectly fine. You cannot disclose it. I read in the law. Yeah, that doesn't work. You cannot disclose if it was done with a certified entity certifying that the property has been remediated. If it's not certified, you must disclose it. And then if it is close to sexual offenders or transitional housing, you can also not disclose that. Now here's where the real world gets involved. I want you to have this little discussion. This will probably be our last little item before our first break. You are managing a property. So some of you don't do property management, that's okay. Put yourself in your shoes here for a minute. You're managing a property. It was previously the location of a suicide. A prospective tenant inquires and says, I need to ensure that there were no deaths in this property. It's really important to my culture that there are no deaths. So how are you going to handle that? Knowing, number one, if your client does not give you permission to disclose, you shall not disclose that. And number two, you're going to have a tenant that has a material fact that they want to know about the property that will also be very important. And let's say 3 months into their lease, they move in and find out from a neighbor. How are you going to navigate those two? So I want you to turn to your neighbor and figure out how you're going to handle that type of a situation. Any questions? Ready? Go.
I sold a house where there was a check in program. It's like a different type of thing. Let's say it is weekly diet. Otherwise, you can find out.
Old age in the house. Yeah. So.
commercial. I'm saying like, he said like, you can't address that next tenant. I just told him that, hey, you know, the ownership of that.
And it's also that people that money.
Yeah. You know what I mean? I feel like there's so many like factors.
Right, exactly.
You know they're gonna walk up to the mailbox and say, hey, did you know that that was your brother?
All right. Need a couple of brave souls to share their thoughts. There's no right or wrong answer. So we're just having a conversation right now. Angela's got a comment. Go ahead, Angela.
We just thought that, the tenant, the potential tenant needs to do the due diligence, go ask the neighbors, we, because it's been probably, a role play. Just ask your neighbors, do your due diligence, go look on the internet.
All right.
Chat.
Angela and Ken are saying, let them do their own due diligence, including asking the neighbors. We're going to hold off on any commentary about that for just a minute. Anybody else have any thoughts? So let them do their own due diligence. Yvette has a comment. Go ahead.
Mine and Lynn's first thought was just go back to the landlord and re-ask if we can disclose this information because you have a possible tenant and the situation.
So Yvette says, go back to the landlord and say, hey, it's coming up. I know you said I couldn't. Can I? Right? Ask the landlord again. Any other thoughts? Again, there's no right or wrong answer. All right. So, I've got a comment. Salpy over here. Go ahead.
I agree with the due diligence of the tenant. I feel like if I was a tenant, I would go above and beyond and research on my own and maybe go to the police department and dig. Yeah, for proof.
So Salpy agrees with Angela and Ken. So there's no right or wrong answer to this because the safe answer, of course, is it depends. Let me tell you why it may not always be a good idea to have the prospective tenant go talk to the neighbor. How accurate do you think that information may or may not be? So we have to think about that. There are situations where you may need to have a conversation with that landlord way ahead of time, if you're aware of this, and basically let them know, look, this has been on the news. Not like it's a secret. Do you want the neighbors, as people walk in, sharing their version of the story, or would you like to allow me to go and state the actual facts of the situation? The bottom line is, if the landlord says, I do not allow you to disclose this, you cannot. Okay? So now we have, and I see Armin had a question, now we have what about this tenant? Can the tenant say, you lied to me and I get to get out of my lease? No, because by statute, you cannot disclose that death. So now let's go to the Angela and Salpy version, which is due diligence. Could you, in a way that does not take away your duties owed to your client of being loyal and obedient to them, allow them to get the source of the source? Yes. This would be the way that would be not loyal or obedient to your client. Well, I'm not supposed to tell you because the landlord won't let me, but if you go to KTNV from last Thursday night and look up the story about the homicide, cough, cough, you might find something out. That would be not obeying the client and not being loyal to your client because you're mad that they didn't let you disclose it. Could you say, I'm sorry, that's not something we can disclose in Nevada. However, if you want to go to a website like, you might want to write this down, diedinhouse.com, diedinhouse.com, and they have to pay for it. And you say that to anybody that asks that question consistently, you're okay. It does, they do charge, everybody charges for everything these days.
You don't think that's gonna like deter them? 'Cause
So-
they're like, oh, someone did die in this house.
Yvette said, do you think that's going to deter them? Again, what's the second best answer? Talk to your broker. So it depends, and talk to your broker. Talk to your broker about, do you want that to be our standard question? Because what you cannot do is outright lie to them. You cannot outright lie to them.